Welcome to the MDC Talks. We are the Motion Dance Collective, a Screendance production company that promotes the creation, presentation, and education of dance on film practice. I am Anna Clifford, and Omari Motion Carter is here, and today we're going to be talking to Wilkie Branson. Wilkie is an interdisciplinary dance artist and filmmaker. Self-taught in both dance and film, which form the main focus of his work, the roots of his practice lie in b-boying. Thanks so much for talking to us today, Wilkie.
It's great to be with you. I'm really honoured to be involved and to have a discussion with you guys. So thanks for having me.
So we always like to ask this question to all of our guests, as you probably have heard maybe on the podcast. But what does the term Screendance mean to you?
Yeah,
starting off big.
I'm dreading that one. I think it really depends. It depends who you're talking to and why you're talking to them. When you try to define something like that, and I think that it's probably it comes down to kind of like labeling something and why you're labeling it. And I think for me, I've kind of always struggled with labeling myself. I think because I'm quite an interdisciplinary artist, and I do lots of things, and I think that the outcomes of what I do vary so much that in a lot of ways I kind of try to define what I do, at least, by the practice and not the product. So the intention of what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, rather than what comes out at the end. And sometimes the thing that comes out is Screendance. But I think also in listening to a lot of you guys have discussed it quite a lot, and I find it a really interesting discussion because there's so many different ways that you can look at that and take it. And I think the work that I do in particular, I kind of feel like the choreographic element of it and the relationship with cinematography and film is the thing that's important, and not dance. And then that, so, I mean, it's getting slightly semantic, but I in Tom, for example, quite a lot of the stuff that was in it didn't have any dance in it. It was, the choreography was kind of not to do with the content of a figure or something that was dancing with intent on the screen. And I think that kind of makes it difficult for me to label what I do often as Screendance. But then you get into that discussion. I remember you having it with James right in the first podcast that you guys did, where you start talking about, well, everything's really on a spectrum. If you're editing, you're really composing movement within time, which essentially is choreography. And so, yeah, I find it's kind of like, it's very difficult to define it.
Yeah. And it's like, you kind of feel like you're forced to, and not of your own doing, is when it gets, to the application stage, or even just writing the blurb, people want to know what they're about to see, but you don't want to give too much away. And then you have to find a way to kind of bridge the gap between your creative practice and audience expectation, right? And yeah, it feels like we grow up in a society where we need to label and compartmentalize in a way, because I heard that in some African languages there isn't a word like music and dance. There's like one word for it.
Oh, really?
Right.
That's interesting.
So they don't separate it in their practice. It's this. It always comes together. It's never one without the other. But so I've been saying this recently at schools, right? We study music, we study dance, we study everything independently.
Separately,
and then we leave, and the only thing we want to do is just bring it all together. We were so interested in these other things that we didn't necessarily get to touch in our studies and our practice. And that's what's crazy, because you've got a background in b-boying, right?
Yeah. I got into dance through b-boying.
Yeah. Was that were you dancing first before you got into the film aspect, or was it something you were doing at the same time? Were you exploring those two practices, kind of thing?
The b-boying came first. I kind of got into b-boying towards the end of the 90s when I was at school, and then I got into film really because at that time there wasn't a lot of, YouTube obviously hadn't been invented, and most of the ways that we were learning how to break was from VHS tapes that we'd like managed to get back from America and stuff. And one of the best ways to actually get better was to get a little handy cam and try and figure out how to do the moves and film yourself. And so it became a tool for basically learning how to b-boy. And then I think that the film aspect kind of really developed from, once I had the camera, I kind of really fell in love with the way that it allowed me to tell stories. That's what I love about films, is the way in which they tell stories. And I think through what we were doing b-boying at the time, which was, battles and, just the community, the aspects of hip hop that are the most important to me. Those were the stories that I kind of really felt like, I can use video to tell some of those things, to express them to people that, maybe wouldn't understand them, that were close to me, like my family. And I think it was really through using camera as a way of documenting that kind of got me into filmmaking and storytelling through that as a medium.
Yeah, it's interesting
Awesome.
that you say like the whole, because like I grew up from the hip hop culture as well, and I felt kind of forced to always be in competition or battle in some way. And then it was only really through seeing the dance theatre process, because hip hop dance on theatre started getting more space to tell longer stories. So I started filming some of those opportunities, breaking convention, of course, John Z being forerunner of that in the UK. But but it wasn't happening that much in screen. There wasn't much. There was still, every time I saw a hip hop dancer on screen, they were either battling each other or battling us, like directly looking at us, and it was more about spectacle.
Yeah.
And screen allowed me to bridge that gap and tell those stories and get it out to different people, like you were saying, who may not be part of that world or that culture, and maybe conditioned to seeing it as one way. And I remember going on the film festival circuit and thinking, there is no hip hop in the Screendance film festival circuit specifically.
Yeah.
I couldn't see any hip hop. And then one day, Little Dreams just plopped up on the screen, right? I was at, where was I?
I can't remember where we were. I think it was in the UK, actually. I feel like it was a festival here somewhere. And it came on, and we both just looked at each other and we were like, I'm making a surprise face, everyone. I
was like, he's b-boying. He's breaking in the film. Yes,
yeah, that was
like,
a very
what?
exciting moment, because it is still very rare to see, I think. I mean, normally when we go to festivals, there's one, maybe two.
It's getting more. You're seeing more
It's
things.
changing. It's shifting for sure. And I mean, just as the demographic in general is evolving,
But
the bodies you see on screen,
right. But the best
is
thing
evolving.
about it was that it wasn't in an urban dance category
Setting.
screening.
Oh,
Or something.
yeah.
It wasn't separated. It was with all the screenings. You saw 6, 7 very, very different works, and it was included within that, and it wasn't, it was
because that's absolutely right. Because before that, I think the only time we'd seen urban dance or hip hop dance on screen had been in a specific screening that was specific to that genre. So it was a great surprise to see Little Dreams in that category, just standing on its own and owning it and owning the space,
Yeah, I think that's kind of like, going back to the thing about Screendance, that's one of the reasons that I have a slight aversion to labeling, I think, is because coming from a hip hop background and like being, because of the way that the technique that I was using, that was being used to kind of label what I would do and what are the expectations and how I would fit into the scene or whatever in general. And from always within hip hop, like that, going against that has been one of the ideals that I really like. That's one of the reasons that I got into hip hop, is you can be the person that you want to be, and you can express yourself in the way that you are, and be true to yourself. And the way that hip hop generally in theater and mainstream cultures and it gets shoehorned. It fills a gap. It ticks a box often, and I think that that's a real shame, because it kind of makes people feel like they, or in the past it's a lot better now, but I think that people have had to tick that box and do the, it has to have the head spin in it and be with a certain type of music and stuff, and I think that really undermines what it is as a culture and an art form. So the fact that now we can be in the theatre or on the screen in equal terms, I think is really important.
You were speaking earlier a little bit about your practice and how for you it's more about the journey as opposed to the product, which I really respect. And it's so obvious from looking at your website and sort of the evolution of your work, back from when you first started making, I guess, work for film, when you first started filmmaking, or at least making it for public consumption. We see White Caps, which I believe was originally a theater piece, and then you turned it into a short film, and then the evolution to Big Wide, to Little Dreams, to Tom. And it's just so interesting to see that, like, on your platform. It's just sort of like the story of Wilkie. It's like your evolution as an artist, as a person. And what I think is so special about that is they're all so different. I think you see a lot of artists these days who sort of find their niche or their voice or their story that they want to tell, and they just get caught in retelling it. Whereas you, everything that I've seen of yours is so unique and so different. Could you talk a little bit about how your practice has evolved over the years and why?
Well, thank you. I think, it's, I think the way that it's evolved, the thing that's the same about it and has always been the same is the starting point for everything that I do. I think that there is, storytelling has always been the heart of it, and it's not necessarily a story, but it's the essence of something that needs to be told, and then the process of making the film and finding out what that film is a way of trying to uncover the truth in whatever that seed is, and it's usually a feeling or something like that. And I think that's always stayed the same, but the relationship with dance and the choreography of the film is something that's probably evolved through that journey. And I think that the main way that it's kind of evolved is when I started out, I was really interested in using the dance on the screen as the principal way of telling that story, but I've always been really interested in landform and the inert choreography that exists within architecture and landscape. And I studied geography was what I studied at university, and I think that maybe it comes a bit from that and growing up in the sticks, but I've always really felt like that you can read the choreography off of an environment, and that's one of the reasons that I really loved films, and a lot of the projects I've done have striven to kind of bring landscape and site-specific work into the theatre to try and marry those two different forms. And I think initially I was placing the dance really at the focus, and as I've gone on, it's become more about trying to bring out that choreography that exists within environment. And obviously I think when you get to Tom, there isn't as much dance on the screen, but it's much more about the way that the camera is dancing with the environment, or the audience is dancing with the environment, if you look at it like that.
Yeah. Amazing. And what inspired you to start working with animation? Because I know you're very much a self-taught artist. I read that you never trained in film, you never trained vocationally in dance, I don't think. And I don't think you ever trained in animation. So what drew you to animation in the first place and made you want to start incorporating it into your work?
I didn't really train in any of those things.
It's very annoying, Wilkie.
Well, self-trained.
All of these.
No, we train.
Omari's the same. He's self-taught too.
No, YouTube
it's a
taught me.
hip-hop
When
thing.
YouTube came out, it changed.
Oh. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Yeah, it's I think like the animation thing is really it's first and foremost through necessity, and I think that comes back to what I learned when I got into hip hop. When, as I said, when we wanted to learn how to do it, we had to teach ourselves how to learn, and that's a skill that I picked up then, and something that is really strong within all hip hop elements is that ability to kind of make do with what you've got, and quite often I was, for example, when I made Little Dreams, I had like a back catalogue of films, and I was living in Brussels, and I didn't really have an opportunity to film anything new, but I really wanted to use some of that stuff, and animation was a way that I could kind of use all of that footage and rework it into a new seed of something that I felt. So it was kind of like the solution to a problem, and like using what I had at hand. But I think that probably ultimately the best thing about animation is that it gives you the ability to create whatever you want to create. It's not often the easiest way to do it because it's often very time consuming, but I think the way that I tend to work as an artist is to visualize everything very in a very finished kind of state in my head, and then try to create it. And the thing about animation is it allows you to actually go through that process, whereas if you were having to film on location, or you had lots of other constraints as to what is actually possible, you kind of can't work like that, because you have to negotiate everything. But animation, suddenly you can create something from nothing, and that's something that I've really loved about it, and why I kind of used it a lot, I think.
Okay, that's incredible. I wonder if it is what you were saying about coming from hip hop. It's sort of a mindset that you have to teach yourself. Because Omari's the same way. He's self-taught in a lot of practices as well. And I mean, it's one of those things that I always admired in people, but it also couldn't relate to, because I came from classical dance. So I very much came from a formal training where you sort of learn what you must learn and then grow. So I wonder if it is the roots of that, that you, coming from that culture, it sort of teaches you to just, as you say, make do with what you have and make the most of it. It's so interesting. I never thought of it that way before.
And imagine the rest.
Yeah.
And create that.
Yeah.
It's so funny, like, how the workflows are so different as well. Like, I've worked with animation once, but I worked with an animation company to create some stickmen for a dance film that we were doing. And that was a very interesting process as well. But then the idea of being able, because that was in a real world, so I kind of knew how to navigate that, right? The animation was placed in that space. But when you're starting from a space of, let's just say, you can create anything you want.
Yeah.
Right? So it opens up.
It's
and
like
sometimes that's harder,
limitless.
right? Or
Yeah.
when you kind of like, but then I think do you get an image of something and go, right, that's exactly what I want to see, and then you can start mapping that out? Or is it something where you'll start animating and it will come as it, is it something you have a very clear idea of every time? Or how do you set boundaries on yourself with that?
Yeah, I think it depends how you work, and obviously everyone works differently. And I think that it suits me well, because I do have often when I'm doing a project, I might spend 6 months just listening to music and playing the whole thing out in my head. I think when I did Whitecaps, I was doing some part-time work as a life model, and it involved like standing still for a very long time, and I basically used that time to visualize the whole thing. So I just used to take my clothes off and do the life modeling and just like be imagining the whole show in my head.
Wow,
By the time
that's
I actually came to
amazing.
filming it, I kind of had the whole thing there, and that suits me really well. But it it's not a way that everyone would want to work.
Yeah, you got to know how your brain works, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So interesting. So, Tom, we could easily spend a lot of time on the whole hour talking to you about Tom because we have so many questions, but could you just describe what the film is about for someone that maybe hasn't watched it yet?
I'll try.
Okay.
It's it's. I mean, I started making it because it's an hour-long piece, and it was originally made as an installation that was going to have live performers in it, sort of projection mapping onto transparent screens and trying to create a cinema experience in terms of like the movement of the person on stage integrating with location. But it was too massive to do that, so it got changed into just having these three transparent gauzes on the stage, and that's kind of the main version of it, and it's been adapted obviously for COVID times into a flat 2D film. But the theme of it really is based off of a video that I had that my parents took when in the 80s when I was 3. They hired a video camera, and they just filmed us going to the beach. It was like a special occasion, and for the 80s that's quite rare. Obviously now people grow up and there'll be tons of videos of them when they get to my age, but I kind of found the video of it, and I looked at the kid in the video, and I was like, I know that child's inside me somewhere, but I feel like I've gone through life and like performed different people throughout life to try and fit in and to try and find my place and to have a purpose, and I almost can't relate to that child anymore, and I feel like that's a universal thing that we all go through in one way or another, and we struggle with it in different ways, and I've struggled with it, and I wanted to make a piece that spoke to that journey to kind of try and reconnect with the inner child inside us all. So being quite cryptic and abstract, that's what it's about, really.
That's a gorgeous description of it.
Wow.
I guess my biggest question was, did you know the story you wanted to tell from the beginning? As you said, it's an hour long. Or did the story kind of evolve and change as you were making it because it took so long to make?
Yeah, it probably took about 8 months or something to write the script or the story, but not constant writing, but like just having it there on the top shelf, just every now and again, like it turning a page, but that what I've described to you before about the video, and that was the feeling, that was the thing, that was the essence of it, that I wanted to try and find a story to tell. And I think it's important to say that I always work with dramaturgs. A lot of the kind of work that I've done that's not been film work has been in theatre, and so quite early on in my career I worked with dramaturgs a lot, and writers, and I think a lot of choreographers, it's more of a new thing to kind of work with them when they're doing stage work. So for Tom, that process of like we wrote it out, we scripted the whole thing out, or I storyboarded it so that what I had in my head could be kind of visualized, and we talked about that. But you're right, the process of animation and how it got made was such a long process that that's one of the things that was really hard about it, was that this kind of thing that was written, and then 4 years later you kind of saw it for the first time, and it's a lot of weight for you to have not made the wrong decisions. But it changed a little bit. We did a version, and then it got slightly revised, and we tried to tighten it up. We tightened it up a bit and did maybe another sort of eight months of work on it. But it's pretty close to the original storyboard, I think.
And I'm guessing I mean, one of my other questions was, because it took such a long time to make, I think it was 3 years, but please correct me if I'm wrong, or the actual length of time that you were working on it. Because I know you talk about if you condense that time down, it took however many years. of man hours, but over a period of time, which I imagine you were working on other things, or, you know, you weren't just 24/7 working on Tom because we have to survive. But how long did it actually take in terms of a timeline? And I mean, were you working on other projects, performing, or, you know, just doing other things, I imagine, at the same time?
Mostly not, actually. It took about
Okay.
the whole thing was about 3.5, 4 years or something. I did like a couple of tours in that time, but it was breaking it down into sections. It was really long. I mean, all the or most of the stuff that's in Tom is models that were handmade, and then they were scanned in to make them 3D. And the after the storyboarding, that was obviously the first bit, and that was it took me about 9 months, I think, to do them, and that was working every day. I was really lucky to get a studio, a little office in the Unicorn Theatre in London Bridge, and I went in, like, the only days I didn't go in was if it was a bank holiday and they shut the theatre, and I just went in when it was open to when it was closed. So but I think that it's important to say that, you know, I'm really privileged to have been able to take the risk on doing it. Like, it's really probably quite unusual for someone to be able to spend that amount of time working on a project. And I did have to make some sacrifices in order to do it. You know, I don't try to live quite frugally, and it meant that I had to give up my flat and move back in with my parents in order to do it. And I'm lucky enough to have that as an option, and I've got no one dependent on me, so I can afford to do that. But yeah, it did take quite a lot of time.
Oh yeah, we can see, sir.
Yeah.
We can see. From the opening shot, I was like, this took even Little Dreams, I was thinking that may have taken a long time. And that's what kind of scares me about animation as well, is that, and it takes patience. It takes patience and time, and so it's like,
and perseverance, I imagine, like.
But then there must be such a level of catharsis afterwards, right? Like, how did it feel to see it the first time you saw it? Like, you got the first draft together. I mean, that must have been a moment, right? Because that's
it's huge.
That's a journey there. That's a saga.
Yeah. I don't know. You know how it is, Omari. It's like when you see it, you see the stuff that you didn't quite get right before you see the
yeah.
But yeah, I think that's what's hard about what's different to working with this kind of animation to working in film straight up, is that when, you know, if you're on set and you set up that great shot and you do a great take with the dancer and you look at it and everyone's like, we're smashing this, and you go back and you review the rushes and you're like, oh, that bit's great, it gives you that, like, that immediate kind of like reward back, whereas when Tom took, like, I think it was probably well over a year to just render it, and that's on a render farm. So when you finish a scene, it's like, I mean, you get like a rough version of it, so you can kind of see whether or not it's going to work. But to actually see what it looks like, you're not seeing it until maybe 9 months later, and so it doesn't really. I think you probably look at it and go, oh crap, the lighting on that's kind of a bit weird, but I can't afford to re-render it, so it's done. So it is kind of very frustrating, but it's an amazing kind of process to be involved in, I think.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm sure all of those like little kinks and mistakes become part of the world as well. Like, even when I'm watching it on 2D, even though I know it wasn't meant in this way, sometimes you see like little lines passing through the atmosphere, and it's like, cool, like you're just in.
Yeah.
Like, after the first 10 minutes I was in, and whatever you did at the very end, the film finished, right, and it goes to the cutaway. Oh, I'm spoiler alert. The cutaway of the real world, right at the very end.
The footage of
Right.
the beach. Yeah.
And so Anna goes, "That looks real." That looks real. It looks so real. I said, Anna, it is real. Like, but we were so
Yeah.
it was yeah, we were
You
just
get
so
lost.
in.
You
Yeah.
get lost in
Get
the
so
world
lost
that
in
you
it.
created,
Right.
and then it takes a while to register
Yeah. It
that you're no longer in
yeah.
it.
It reminds me of when I used to play RPGs and those sort of games on PlayStation, right? And you'd be in, man. Like once you turned that on and you were in the world, you were in the world. It didn't matter how crap the graphics were, what was going on. If the story was
Yeah.
right, you know, there's so yeah, no, dude, I love it, man. I appreciate it, man. You saw that email I sent you. It was
Yeah.
it was I had to give direct feedback.
Yeah.
Never done that before. You just have to go, look, I need to message Wilkie immediately. But stunning. No, really cool.
I wanted to ask you about one of our favorite scenes, both of us, was the scene with Eben in the room where you danced together.
Oh my God.
And I mean, obviously, I think that scene would touch anyone, regardless of if you have a child or you relate to your inner child. I think it just is a very emotional, heartwarming moment, which I imagine listening to you speak about the work is sort of like the crux of what the piece was about, what it was for, the purpose, the goal. And it's just because he being, I don't know, I think he was 2 at the time, I read somewhere, maybe, this innocent, vulnerable, just like happy spirit, and then the way you interact and the movement that you kind of explored together, it's super special and unique. And I don't think I've ever seen a film that explored that idea in that way, which I think is why it got me, because the second time I watched it, I cried. And it's just so powerful. And I think part of that is the buildup you give it. You know, we see your journey to that point, and we see a little bit of Eben up until that point.
Yeah, we need that release. I mean, yeah, you just got punched in the face like 10 times. And I was like, oh! Like, we need to do a reaction. I was saying to, I was speaking to Simon Files. I don't know if you know Simon. He's a
filmmaker
Screendance in Scotland. But I was saying we need to do reaction videos, because if you were to see our reaction video to your film, because sometimes, I don't know if you've ever done this, if you see your film in the cinema, you watch the people who are watching it. Just to look, because you've seen the film, right? So you kind of, you just look around to see if anyone laughs at any or does any different thing. We need to do a watch party for Tom and get some different people watching it, because it's an emotional roller coaster. And that moment is such a moment of release, like a moment of home.
Yeah.
Even if it's just for a moment, it's like, yeah, man.
But I guess
I hear that.
My question about it was...
Oh, yeah, question, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just going off on one over here. That scene in particular. Can you talk a little bit about your decision to work with Eben? What that meant in the real life, working with your nephew and having that interaction and that creation, because I watched the behind the scenes of him talking about working with you, and that almost made me cry, because he clearly is going to remember that for the rest of his life. Like, it's super special.
That's going to be his video.
Yeah. So can you just talk a little bit about working with him and how you incorporated that into the work, and how he helped sort of bring that essence of what you wanted it to be about to life?
Yeah. I mean, off the bat, he luckily, based off of the video of me when I was that age, which is in the film, he did kind of look quite similar to how I looked. So instantly it was like, okay, that's a win. That's a good win there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, from a family point of view, it was an amazing opportunity. The first, I'd probably been doing it for making Tom for nearly a year and a half, probably, before we started filming with Eben. So, you know, that was the first part of his life, and I was so busy doing that. I think that I didn't see him that much, and it was something that we could share together and I think tying in with the themes of the work, that was a really beautiful opportunity for us to do that together. Yeah, and but it wasn't without its challenges. I mean, if you work with young children, it's difficult to, he didn't understand really what, the not the process of the workflow or something, but the fact that what we were going to do, he was in this green screen and climbing up and down crates or dancing, and being able to see what that was for was difficult or impossible for someone of his age. So but it meant that we got a chance to play games. Everything was about playing games and making it fun. And he did like doing things like cleaning the studio and stuff like that instead of actually doing this stuff quite often. But yeah, it was a really beautiful opportunity to work with him and to work with the rest of my family, because a lot of all of that was done when I was living back at my parents', and the green screen was in their garage. So all of the sort of grip work really for the piece was done more or less by my mum and dad. So it reconnected me a lot to my family. I think that was a great thing that came out of it.
Oh gosh,
well,
yeah.
So important, right? And any excuse, I mean, if you can do it in your work, that's just so lovely as well, to bring them into that process.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy.
Makes it even more meaningful, I think, for you, I guess, as an experience, because it totally changed the process and the journey.
Yeah, definitely.
Can you talk a little bit about, you mentioned it earlier, but the possibilities when you're using a digital camera and the freedom that gives you to sort of shape what people see and what the audience experiences. And I guess we kind of touched on it earlier, Omari mentioned, but our biggest question was, how do you make those decisions of choreographing the digital camera, when you have limitless options? Because I imagine you had a vision of what you wanted people to see, but then when you actually got to constructing it and creating it in the world that you made for Tom, you had so many options. So how did you make some of those choices?
When you say digital camera, do you talking about the virtual camera in
the virtual
Tom
camera
world?
in Tom, yeah, that sort of like travels around the landscape through the train, and do you know what I mean? How did you make some of those choices? Was that just sort of instinct, like this is where I want to go, or was there also moments of, oh, I have 100 options here, which one shall I choose?
Yeah, it's a good question, and you're right. When you have the infinite possibilities, it is you have infinite possibilities. But I think that a good way of looking at it is it's quite, to me, it feels very similar to if you're listening to music on the train or something like that, and you're just thinking about how you might dance to that, or when you can't actually dance because you're not in the situation, but you can I might be able to do this, or you can imagine that kind of, you can imagine yourself dancing. It's the same as that. And I make everything that I make, I kind of start with the music, so, and then you just paint it in. So through like walking, there's a lot of stuff that happens in the underground kind of metro system in Tom, and from just walking through that system and living it, and quite often walking through it, listening to music, you see the lines and you see the choreography of the people in there, and how the camera dances within that structure, within the architecture, and to the music. It's just something that I sort of imagined it. And then I guess the other thing that is important with choreography, and maybe different to like dancing sometimes, is that you're really thinking about a composition of movement over time and different time scales. So it's how each shot, the movement of this shot connects to the next shot, how that sits with the pace of the section before it, the movement in the section before it, and how those things relate to one another over different time scales and different lengths of time. And I think that's really what the practice is. And fortunately, like with the virtual cameras and doing it in Cinema 4D, I could more or less render something in just like a sort of blocky, old school kind of like version, and see the movement of the camera really quickly. So you could kind of like thrash out that dance with the camera and the architecture and kind of see it, and then go, yeah, that works. Like that's the flow of that is how it should be, and each movement of each scene speaks to one another in the correct way. The dialogue between the different shots works. So yeah, I think it was kind of like that.
Wow. Okay. That's so interesting. And I have to ask this. Was the underground station based on Canary Wharf? Was it inspired by Canary Wharf? Because we watched it and we were like, that
It was
looks
just
like...
the escalators, yeah. Because I was like, there's some long escalators. There's only one escalator.
It's closed. I mean, it Jubilee line definitely, but
Okay.
I think the station that really like I don't go very often to it, but it's Westminster,
Okay.
which just looks like something out of Star Wars. It's just like
Yeah.
concrete and like metal and massive. It's just
Yeah.
monolithic but yeah, Jubilee line for sure. Definitely.
Okay. It was so interesting to be in this world, and then there were moments of that were reminiscent to me of something, either in London or just in my life. And that's what was so interesting about it too, because there were moments that you were sort of like, oh yeah, I'm watching something right now. I'm not I was living it, but you know what I mean? It's sort of like small, gentle reminders of you're watching a story, you know.
What was one of the biggest challenges then when it came? Because there was a lot of moving parts. And so was the biggest challenge more on the animation side, or was it more of, because you perform like with yourself a lot of the time, so you're imagining all of these things. Does it? Yeah.
What was the biggest
What was the biggest
challenge?
challenge, I think?
Yeah.
If you had to pick one.
Yeah, there was a lot of technical challenges. There was a lots of bits that were like hard to do technically. But if I'm honest, that's one of the things that I really love about doing that kind of work, and is the problem solving and like that investigation and the learning. So I'm not sure I'd say that was the hardest thing. I think probably the hardest thing about it was the not knowing, like taking like nearly 4 years to do something, and the weight of a project like that becomes immense, and when you can't see it often, it becomes too big. It's too big to fail. It's like that kind of thing, and suddenly I've invested so much of my life into this thing. And you lose sight of the woods for the trees, or whatever the saying is. Like when you've been in something that deep for so long, it becomes quite hard to have and even it's like with everything that we make, and I'm sure it's the same for all of us. You can't see what you've made with fresh eyes, and just that when you've been doing something for that long, you really lose sight of that. And also you have to, with something that's very made up of all these different elements that are all quite technically difficult, it's about compromise. And I know that's something that you guys have talked a lot about on in the talks. Like with any kind of filmmaking, you have to balance up where you're going to put your priorities and things. And I think that within this, it was always just, how much time can I spend like rehearsing this thing or devising this choreography versus building this environment or making this thing so that I can do this particular thing, or there were so many bits, and there has to be compromises drawn, and like knowing where to draw them is always the hard thing in anything. And I think that's probably what I found most hard in this.
Oh, you sort of said it there a little bit, but one of the other things I wanted to ask you was, do you have any advice for an artist who is working on a project that's maybe taking a lot longer than they anticipated?
That's a good question. I don't know about with the length, but one thing that I would say is, and Omari, I don't know how much you can speak to this as well, but I I feel very much an outsider artist, having not really had a institutional kind of pathway into the thing that I'm doing for work and within art. And I think that that's a really interesting double-edged sword, because you don't have often the you come to the work without the context of things. So when I first started making work, I didn't think about cliches or can you do this or has it been done before. It didn't make any difference to me. I made what I wanted to make, and that position of ignorance was an amazing freedom to have. And then I did a course with Jonathan Burrows at Sadler's, the Sadler's Wells Summer University, and it was kind of like it exposed me to the wider kind of dance world and a lot of the other people on the course that had a very different pathway into that place. I kind of saw within them that they were very constrained by permissions of what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do, and it really made me value that liberty that I had, but also it kind of made me really aware of how naive I was as well. And I think that being aware of those two things and having the confidence to tread your path and do what you feel is right for your art, but also to be aware of the context that your art is going into is a very difficult but important thing to just sit with and think about.
Yeah, and it takes time. You have to go to, like you said, you took the step to the choice to go to that Jonathan Burrows experience,
Yeah.
to grow that side of your practice, that side of your patterning. Because it was exactly the same for me. You kind of grow, you learn and grow as you go. And I say every now and then, I try not to watch too much dance film. Like, even though there's so much happening right now, and people say, "Why have you seen this?" And I'm like, "Not yet. I need to give myself time." Like, I'm still handling Tom right now. I'm processing that. Let me take a few months to look at that really and see that, because it's people just watch things once nowadays, right? And I remember back in the day, we were talking about the VHSs we had, right? We would put those on every week. Muppets Treasure Island.
Yes. Please rewind.
Yeah, exactly. All of those things, and I'd watch them all the time, and it's very rare that we watch things once. Like, people say, "Oh, there's nothing on Netflix nowadays." Watch it again. Even Anna goes, "Do you mind watching this again with me? You've already seen it." I'll say, "Well, today I'm just going to look at the camera this time."
Yeah.
Or I'm going to take a different stance on it or look at it in a different way. Just look at the color and enjoy that as a thing. So I've lost my train of thought, but it's just about as much of trying to do your own, not being hindered by the cliches that are out there, because they can affect you if you watch them too much, because they'll kind of infest in your practice a little bit.
Yeah.
And even when I'm teaching, I feel like my job is to break that in my students, because they have been conditioned to see things in a certain way. And so it's kind of taking care of myself when I'm watching work, is kind of going, okay, I've seen at least 15 films this week. I'm going to chill on that, let that fester.
Yeah.
Decide what I don't like and do like about them. But then that process has come from now me doing my masters and doing things at London Contemporary Dance School, where I didn't have strategies for how to handle my viewing and how I program and curate things now. So it's definitely helps to have a good amount of both worlds as you need, and be a sponge to it and take as much as your sponge can handle and release things that you don't have space for.
I think one of the biggest challenges we face as artists in the current climate is that idea of trying to be original, trying to create something unique, because it's so hard to do now, because we now have access to the internet and being able to expose ourselves to work from around the world, from a wealth of different people and different cultures. It's very hard to be original. I think that we're so inspired by watching other people's work.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I am. I don't know if that's a generalization, but one of the reasons I love watching other people's work is to be inspired by it and to sort of find a new idea that's sparked by something I've seen or experienced, right?
But it starts off
But
like
then at
that,
the same
doesn't it?
time, like you were saying, you can overdo it and you can just be like overstimulated by everyone else's inspiration that you feel almost trapped in your own. Like you somehow can't create a new idea anymore because
It's always starting from a context of outside of yourself.
yeah.
And that's the key here, is that we need to just look at us. Because that's the originality. There's no one has your coding, your framework. And once you do that, you're creating things that you're creating. I was thinking, is this the first dance feature? Even though I'm sure you may not call it a dance film in itself, right? Because it has so many entities, but it may be the first dance feature film without words that I've seen. And I'm not talking about Deviate Physical Theatre.
Yeah.
I'm talking about dance film. Because even Pina has a documentary in it.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the new Merce Cunningham one, but you know that's got words in it. But like, I think this is the first non-scripted, well,
I mean,
non-word. Yeah, possibly.
Yeah.
What do you think? I don't think I've seen one. Another one.
I'm not sure, but I think going back to like another question that you did ask before about what was difficult about it, and I think that the risk of making something that long, like I'd never made anything that was that long, and wasn't really working with anyone that there wasn't much reference to look at it and go, will something like this sustain for that long, or is it going to be how's that going to work? What's it going to feel like to watch 60 minutes of this? So I think it's interesting, like to have something without dialogue and that exists in that slightly abstracted world that is that long.
Yeah.
What was what would you say the most significant thing you learned about yourself was from the process of making Tom?
I think probably two things. The first thing was something that I relearned, and I relearn every time I do something, and that's that I have this. I'm driven to do something, imagining that when it's done, it's going to fundamentally change me, and it's going to change my world, and it's done, and it comes out, and the next day's another day, and it doesn't really fundamentally change the world. And I think that we as artists quite often we place so much emphasis on the significance of the work that we do, and it's, I think when you're looking for that work to address things that lie deep within you or outside of you, they do have an impact, but the impact that they have isn't often the one that we're hoping that magically they'll have. So I think kind of relearning that, as I do every time I do something, was something that was significant. And I think the other thing was just, it's another relearning, and I talked about it a bit earlier, but just was that I feel really privileged to be able to make this kind of work. And I think that I've made a lot of sacrifices, and it's not to undermine the effort or the skills that go into it, but I can afford to take the risks, and I've been afforded the opportunities to make a piece of work like this, and I know that isn't the same for everybody. And doing something on this scale, I think it really brings that back to the fore, and I think it's always important for me to acknowledge that it is a really privileged position to be able to do this, to take those risks, to make those sacrifices. And I think that's an important learning. And so I'd say that probably.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
So would you do it again?
Now that you've made a feature length, work? Do you think you will do it again?
Yeah, in some ways, I think. But I think really, as I said to you before, when this project started, it was really to try and create a piece of work that could exist in a theatre that had an audience that shared the experience and shared an experience of a live performer, but took all of the elements that Tom uses from the cinematic world and brings those into that environment. So I think that it would be a similar pathway, but the thing that it was trying to arrive at would be trying to achieve that goal,
right,
in that form.
right.
Because Tom was originally intended as an installation, right? So I imagine hopefully in the coming years, it'll have multiple opportunities to be experienced in the
way it was meant to be.
That format. Has it actually appeared yet as it was originally intended in a installation setting?
It had, yeah. In 2018, the film wasn't as long because it wasn't finished, but we did it at Sadler's, and then we were supposed to be touring all of this year. Obviously, we haven't. But we did go to Pavilion Dance in Bournemouth, and we did it in September there. But next year, the installation is going to be hopefully about a bit. So
Okay.
I'll try and keep people posted on that so people can have a chance to see what that version of it is.
Right. Oh, wicked.
It's so, yeah, I forget that it was intended as an installation because I just am so immersed in it as a film that it's hard to imagine it existing in a different context. So I would love to experience it in that way and see what it changes as a viewer, as an audience member.
Mm-hmm. I got my mask ready.
So please, Wilkie, it's been incredible speaking to you, and we could keep talking. But please tell us about what's coming up next and how our listeners can follow your work and stay in touch with everything that you're doing.
Yeah. Well, I think that, who knows what's coming next with where we're at right now, but I think that the look out for Tom next year, hopefully as an installation. It'd be great to get it in some dance film festivals as well. But unfortunately, it doesn't. It's a tricky one because it doesn't actually fit into most of the criteria because it's kind of too long to submit it to a lot of stuff. But hopefully, it might get out about a bit more. So look out for those things, and I guess the best way to follow me is through the usual kind of Instagram-y, Facebook-y kind of things, and through the website, so which I'm sure you guys can link below.
Yeah, we'll definitely link below.
100%.
Yeah.
Wilkie, I just want to say thank you for making this film. Thank you for all the stresses, pain, blood, sweat, tears, happiness, joy you went through to get this to fruition.
Yeah.
And even the films, like from the films before and everything, I've been following and knowing of your work for a long time. So it's just it feels a privilege for me to be able to at least just chat with you. We can talk below this surface level of everything we talk about, right? And just check in with one another, because you make me want to be better. Like, you make me realize that there's a I don't know. I can't say it. I don't even know what to say. I just think you're sick, dude. You're sick. And yeah, thank you for honoring us with that film, man. That's gonna be on my list of my VHSs that I watch over and over again, I think. So thanks, dude. Yeah, man.
But thank you for spending the time to speak to us.
No, well, it's a massive privilege to be able to speak to you guys, and I love what you guys are doing, and I think that it's the work that you guys are doing, both of your films and with all of the talks and stuff, and everything, all the effort that you put in at the festivals, it's such a massive thing for the scene to have you guys doing that. So it's a massive privilege to be a part of it. So thank you.
Thank you,
thank
dude.
you.
Lovely, man. All right, well, we'll end this here. This
Yes.
is the MDC Talks.